Hello, this is Robert Plenick, the owner of Brutal Iron Gym. I'm here for the third video in a series of videos in which we're addressing the weaknesses in squat, bench, and deadlift. So the purpose of these videos is to kind of discuss, like if you're currently stuck at a 1 rep max, what might be the things you can focus on in order to move past that current number. So in the very first video we talked about kind of the general concepts of what to address whenever you're experiencing like kind of a plateau, or when your strength's kind of like leveled off. It usually comes down to kind of technique of the lift. So you're most likely going to have a technical problem. So that's the first thing you want to address. Then the second thing we want to look at is physical strength, and that just kind of gets you physically stronger to perform the lift once you're performing it correctly. And then the last part here is mental cues. So we're going to kind of discuss that in this video in relation to the bench press specifically. So again, in video 1, if you haven't checked it out, it talks about kind of the general scope of addressing weaknesses. So it's a very helpful video to look at. So in this video about the bench press, the first thing we're going to kind of talk about is technique. So the point of talking about the technique is, like for example, if you have trouble getting your upper back tight in a bench press, I can't tell you in this video how to do that specifically for you. So there are a bunch of how-to bench press videos out there, but the point of this video is to just get you critically thinking of these technique components and trying to work on them yourself. So, and again, we talked about in the first video is how to work on these techniques. So you want to kind of do your lift, try to review it, try to compare your lift to a training partner who maybe has better form, or comparing your lift to somebody on YouTube who has better form. So one of the things I've done for bench press is there's a lifter named Jeremy Hornstra who I ran across on YouTube, and I I used his format and his style. I realized it felt really good for me, so I used that for a while. I recently went to a clinic with Dave Hoff, and he was talking about how he sets up for the bench press. So it's just kind of like learning more and putting yourself out there and continuing to try to educate yourself. So one of the first things you want to look at is upper back tightness. So most people, if they're kind of newish to lifting, when they lay back on a bench to do either barbell or dumbbell press, they just kind of like roll back into position, and their back is really flat, their shoulder blades are opened up, and whenever they're lifting, their shoulders are kind of like moving around all over the place. So in order to get stronger and in order to protect yourself so you don't get like a pec tear or some other injuries, you want to have your shoulder blades kind of pulled back and down, and what that's going to do is kind of set kind of a good stability for your shoulders when you're pressing. So that's the first thing we want to address, is tight upper back. So you want to kind of think the next time you go in your bench press workout is, what am I doing with my upper back? Are my shoulder blades accounted for? Like, are they tight, or are they just kind of floating around? So you want to kind of think of that component. So the next thing we have is an arch, and this kind of falls in line where if we have our upper back pulled really tight, what it's going to do is it's going to cause our lower back to kind of pick up off the bench, so there will be a space between your lower back and the bench. That's perfectly fine and healthy, assuming your butt is still down on the bench. So you should have your shoulders touching and your hips touching, and if the middle is not touching, that's okay. So and what this does, it raises your torso, and also like having that arch allows you to flex your lower back, and it's going to help give you more rigidity, so more tightness in the middle of you, and it'll actually make you safer and stronger. So having an arch is perfectly acceptable in bench pressing, and it's not a bad thing. So then we want to kind of address our feet. So if you get into powerlifting, some powerlifting federations allow you to have just your toes touching where your heel can be up in the air, and some federations say your whole bottom of your foot has to be touching. So if you're going to do a competition, you want to look into the rules for that federation. So same thing with kind of head placement. Some federations will allow you to have your head up off the bench. Some of them force you to have it down on the bench. So you want to look that up. So if your federation has a certain limitation, you want to start practicing with that. So, and that way you can have your lift count at the meet. So if you're just lifting in general, kind of two styles of foot placement. Is some people will have their feet kind of flat on the floor, and they tend to be kind of like out and wide in front of them. Other people tend to have their feet kind of together and pulled and tucked underneath them, and that helps them kind of get an arch. So in either position, the whole idea is you're trying to create tightness in the legs. So you should not have your feet flopping around, your legs moving around, your bench pressing. So you want to have your feet firmly on the ground. They're either going to be that out and wide part, and then that'll give you good push and leg drive, or you'll have your feet kind of pulled together and up, and that'll get you a really good arch. And again, you can still get leg drive out of that position as well. So, but the idea is that your feet are accounted for and they're not sliding around, and every time you set up, your feet should be doing the same thing. So once you kind of are practicing a component, so if I'm practicing flat-footed for the day, I want to practice the same thing every set, or make small purposeful changes. But in my general habit of bench pressing, my setup should always look the same. So if your feet are doing one thing one time, they should be doing the same thing next time. So another component we kind of look for is, I have written here, squeeze and twist. And what this does, it helps with wrist placement and upper arm placement. So when you're grabbing the bar, sometimes people will try to lift and their wrist is kind of like bent back like this. So instead of being nice and straight, so when they're pushing the bar. So that's going to create weakness. So it's going to have that wrist joint, it's going to be kind of bent. So if you can see that, so it'll be bent there. It's just going to create a point of weakness. So if you straighten it out, then everything is kind of in a straight line, and the energy that you're trying to transfer into the bar will have a better pathway, so there won't be a loss of energy. So, and by helping to do that, will help to kind of squeeze the bar. So if you squeeze the bar as hard as you can, that will help to straighten out your wrist. So that's kind of a good cue to have. And maybe after a while, if like you don't like squeezing, it's really a good idea. So I really suggest you should try it, but at least start with it. And then if you want to loosen up some, that's fine. But you definitely should never have your wrist kicked back like that. So, and twisting tends to be, what that refers to is when I grab the bar and I'm going to unrack it, I want to actually try to like twist my elbows in. So the concept would be, if you think of the bar as like a light metal rod, you're trying to bend the rod. So that's the idea, is you're trying to bend the bar. So that's going to bring your upper arm kind of tight. So, and that's going to get your upper arm kind of tight into your lat, and it's going to help kind of protect everything and give you a nice stable base. So what it does, it creates a little bit of torque in your shoulder, but that helps to kind of tighten everything down. So that way nothing's loose. So those are kind of the technical cues. And then the last one we have there is belly up. So what this refers to is, as you're bringing the bar down to yourself, you want to be pushing your stomach up into the bar. You will not be able to leave, like you won't be able to get a physical height change. So if your belly actually does lift, it's probably because you picked your butt up. But the whole intent of thinking of pushing your belly into the bar is that way, as you come down to the bar, your belly won't drop and create an, either over-rotation in your shoulder or create a greater range of motion that you now have to overcome. So you do want to keep your torso and that arch really tight and push your stomach up into the bar as it's coming down. So those are technical cues you want to kind of address. But again, the main point of these videos is more so this part is kind of addressing physical changes or physical lifts you can do. So in these videos, we're going to be talking mostly about just variations of bench press. So can doing dumbbell presses help your bench press? Absolutely. But we're not going to go through all the variable lifts there are out there. We're just going to be talking about variations of barbell bench press. So first common thing we have is like people will miss with the lockout. So they'll come up off their chest, make it through midway, then you just kind of stall out at the top. So one of the lifts you can do to kind of work on that is close grip. So whatever your normal grip is, bring it in about 2 fingers width, maybe even 4 fingers width, and do some benching there. What that does, it helps to build up your triceps, and then it'll build up your lockout power. So the other thing we have is adding bands and chains. So as I mentioned in the squat video, sometimes people will have a disagreement about whether beginners or intermediates should use bands and chains. I have nothing against it, so I've used bands and chains in beginners. It helps them get better at that adaptation, and then of course we take it back off to make sure they can still do the adaptation without that extra signal, so the bands and chains supply. So the idea though is you're going to use bands and chains to kind of learn the adaptation you're looking for, and then you're going to take them away to make sure you can still do the adaptation without them. So you should never really rely on bands and chains, and you do want to still do lifts in basic ways, so they're not a bad thing to mix in. So if it helps the person, so to each their own kind of thing. So if person A uses it and they find it beneficial, person B doesn't want to use it, that's fine for person B, and it's fine for person A. So the last thing we have there for helping your lockout is going to be high board presses. So where you're going to come down to a board press, like if you're not familiar with board presses, basically it's just putting wood on your chest at different heights, and you'll bring the bar down until it touches that and press back up. But it might shorten your range of motion, like maybe to here and back up versus all the way back down. So you want to keep the boards relatively at a high count, where you're going to be mostly in that lockout range. So taking a board like all the way down to maybe 1 inch off your chest, will it help your lockout specifically? It might, but that's not the best way of doing it. Usually to help your lockout, you're going to do a high board combination, where again you're kind of staying in that top range of motion. So that keeps the emphasis on the triceps. So the next thing we have, I have a little asterisk here, because another reason why people can miss a lockout is just due to lack of speed. So they're just not fast enough. So we're going to be talking down here about how to get faster on the bench press. So this is something to keep in mind. If you're having trouble with lockout, you're also going to want to work on speed as well. So the next thing we have written here is off the chest. So if a person kind of comes down to the chest and they either just can't get it started, or they touch and it kind of comes up an inch or two and stalls out, these will be the lifts they would want to try to focus on. So what we have written on here is off the chest pause, or off chest pauses. So I would actually want to come down to where like I can have a variation where I'm maybe an inch above my chest, where I'll pause and then have to generate force and press from there. Or I'll actually come down, I call it touch the shirt presses, where you'll come down and actually physically touch the shirt with the bar, but you're not going to let the bar actually rest onto your chest. So the idea is you're just kind of hovering right above your chest. So and those variations are going to have you spending more time under tension in that weak area, and over time that'll build the muscles of that area. So that's kind of like one variation is off the chest pauses. The other thing we have is low board presses. So very often people tend to think of board presses as working your lockout, but if you do a board press to a very low board, like say a half or a 1 or 1.5, something like that, what happens is you're going to come down to a point where you get out of the triceps and you start to load into the chest. So then when you hit a pause there and you have to press, it has to be initiated through the chest, and then you can work on the lockout. So, so doing a low board press actually does help initiate chest drive and initiate drive off the bottom of the bench press. So the other thing we have here is to prevent bouncing. And what this refers to is if a person lowers it down about 3/4 and all of a sudden they just kind of drop it on themselves and then try to press back up. That's one of the phrases we would use is called bouncing it, or dropping the press. So, and usually what that comes down to is lack of confidence and lack of strength in that bottom portion. So again, it's going to be off the chest pauses, because that's where your weak is, down in that bottom part. And then you can do what's called descending board presses. So if a person's like say about 2 inches off their chest, we'll just say 3 inches. At 3 inches off their chest, they tend to start to drop right there. Well, you're going to do a 3 board then, and have them get comfortable touching and pressing and touching and pressing, where they stay in control. Then you can move from a 3 board to a 2 board and have them still stay controlled and touch and press. And then you go down to a 1 board and then down to their chest. So what it's going to do is just kind of build their confidence as they get lower and lower and lower towards their chest. So, and again, it's kind of spending more time down in that area of weakness. So the next thing we have is building speed in a bench press. So this is going to be very similar if you're familiar with West Side method or the conjugate method. So it's dynamic effort work or speed work. So that's what we're going to be focusing on in this style of training. So it's going to be using band tension. So the idea is to use a small amount of plate weight, and then with a little bit of band resistance. And what that does, it makes it light enough that you can do a lot of sets and reps and kind of get a lot of reps and work in, and light enough that you can be fast and be explosive with it. But the key is it also has to be heavy enough that if it's too light and you're going to be really explosive, all of a sudden you'll push yourself out of position, or it'll kind of be chaotic. So you have to have enough weight on the bar and enough weight and resistance to where you can be super aggressive and explosive, but it keeps you in position. So what we generally recommend is going to be 50% of your 1 rep max in bar weight. And you can be a little bit lower than this, so you might want to start with like 33%, so 1/3. kind of try a workout like that, and then maybe try to move up a little bit from there. So anywhere from like maybe 33% to 50% in bar weight. So if I press 300 pounds, because to make the math easy for me, I'll have anywhere between 100 to 150 pounds on the bar. So, and then the rest of the tension is going to come from the bands. And what we're looking for in band tension, we're going to generalize it and say 25%. So what this means is it's going to be really hard to kind of figure out what's exactly 25% of your max in bands. So the way I kind of think of it is if I have the bar plus the bands, it should feel roughly about 25% of my 1 rep max. So if I bench currently 400 pounds and I have the bands and the bars and the bar, it should feel roughly around 100 pounds. So that's the right amount of band tension. And then from there I'll just add plate weight. So again, this is kind of a generalized way. You will see sometimes people will use like luggage scales, and they'll actually measure out the tensions of bands. You can do that, that's perfectly fine. But if you don't want to go through that ordeal, then you want to kind of set up in this way where you can kind of just roughly guesstimate. So the whole idea is you're having a little bit of band tension where as you get to the top of the range of motion, that band's going to add a little bit of resistance. So that way you have to overcome that added resistance, and that helps you to kind of what we consider as pressing faster or moving faster. So as you initiate the movement, you're going to actually have to accelerate towards the top, and that's going to get you to move faster. So the last thing we have is kind of positioning. So if you feel like as you go throughout the lift, you feel strong in some parts of it, but weak in other areas of the lift in terms of range of motion. So maybe you're strong up here, then as you come down, there's a middle spot where you feel like you're going to die. So what this does is the technique of slowed eccentrics and concentrics will help you kind of improve the positioning throughout the lift and improve your strength throughout all positions. So what slowed eccentrics and concentrics is you're going to kind of think of it as like a slow motion press. So you may do like a 3 or a 5 count where you go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You'll touch your chest, then you'll press up at 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So that's the idea, is it's really slow on the way down and slow on the way up. So you won't be able to move a lot of weight, but you want to move as much as you can with the rep range you're working with. But the idea of it is you're just spending more time under tension throughout all parts of the range of motion, and that'll in turn make you strong in all parts of the range of motion. So again, there's probably a lot more. There actually is a lot more variations. So for example, some people for like off the chest, they'll do what's called dead presses or rack presses, where they have in a squat rack or something, they have like resting the weight right on their chest, and then they have to kind of explode from that position. And what that does, it takes out the eccentric loading, so there's no stretch reflex, and you have to generate that force all from your chest. That's perfectly fine too. So the idea of this list is that it just gets you someplace to start, and then from there maybe you can look into it more and research more and find more variations. So if you look on this side of the board, the last thing we're going to kind of talk about is the mental aspects of getting stronger in the bench press. So these will be the same in all three lifts mostly. So what we're looking at is practice and review. So what you want to do is in your bench work, you're going to be doing a lot of sets and reps in order to get better. You don't want to just do them kind of mindlessly. So you want to be practicing a certain cue or concept for that day, and you want to be reviewing as you're going. Constantly do something, review it, do something, review it, to see if what you're doing is actually good quality. So it's not just doing it over and over and over, it's doing it right over and over and over. So the next thing we have there is cue cards. So another thing some of my clients will do, and it's worked well in the past, is I'll have them write cues, like certain things they're working on that day, on a card, and before every single set they'll read that cue or they'll say those words themselves, and that's going to help build up their, kind of like autopilot, it's going to build up their habits of doing those cues, and that'll make it more automatic for them, so that way they won't mess them up whenever they're under heavy weight. So the next thing we have is extended warm-ups. So this is just kind of more practice. That's the concept. So if a person wants to do like 315 and they come into the gym, they just do 135 for a set, 225 for a set, 275 for one, and then they try 315. That's not a lot of work before your main lift. So what you might want to do is extend your warm-up sets and get more practice sets in to get these cues down, to get the physical ability down before you get back to your heavy lifting. So for example, if a person is working up to 315, they might want to come in and just use the bar, kind of work on these cues right here while they're under the bar. They may be 95 pounds, maybe 135, 185, 225, 275, and then when they get to 315, they'll have enough practice in that everything will be nice and consistent. So if you're truly doing a 1 rep max testing day, you might want to limit some of those warm-ups. So not necessarily warm-ups in sets, but in reps. Maybe you'll just do 2 or 3 reps at each weight. But if you're in the gym for a day where you're actually going to work on your strength rather than testing it, then doing all these warm-ups is actually a really good idea. It's going to just help give you more practice. So these are the concepts for bench press. So this is our 3rd video in the series. So hopefully you find it helpful. If you have questions specific to this video and bench pressing, you can email us at brutalirongym@gmail.com. That's brutalirongym, all small letters, all one word, @gmail.com. Thank you.